He had a special talent for doing special things.
Oh, it's a goal! It's a useful cross. Sinclair. Only dropped to Beckham! Every goal he scores is an absolute beauty.
I don't think you could ever underestimate the ability of what David Beckham had.
David Beckham's work rate on a football pitch was fantastic.
Beckham again, looks for the chip. Oh, what a goal!
Fantastic cross off the ball.
One of the best crosses of all time. I mean, everyone's tried to copy him since.
But there was no bigger star. David Beckham was a star.
Trying to get a goal for United now, and get a goal he does.
David Beckham broke into the Manchester United ranks alongside a crop of teammates who had won the FA Youth Cup in 1992. They were a special group who helped establish the club's 20-year dominance of the Premier League.
Neville, Bot Scholes, Beckham, Giggs. This team, this group of young players, was all anyone around the club would talk about.
Beckham getting it through. Here's Cole. And now Sharp. Oh, it's a goal! Beckham has scored out of absolutely nothing, and Manchester United have regained their lead.
I mean, I first remember him when he played in, it was a tournament the under-21s always played in Le Tournois, and I interviewed him by the swimming pool at the hotel they were staying in. Years later, I thought, you know, I interviewed this lad, and you just couldn't have seen what was to come.
You got a very distinct impression of a fairly shy, very quietly spoken, but very determined.
It wasn't like a young Ryan Giggs, where I think from a very young age that people knew something special was coming through the ranks here.
And in fairness, you have to point out that it wasn't just the six that made it. They had high hopes for a lot more. Your Ben Thornleys, your Keith Gillespies, your Chris Caspers, your John O'Kanes. Obviously, they realised that not all of them could make it, but it wasn't just the six, it was the whole team.
Which, of course, drew the famous Alan Hansen comment, you'll never win anything with kids, after a bit of an early season hammering, really, which suddenly made you think whether United could actually go from strength to strength or not.
He could dribble with the ball, but he doesn't need to dribble with the ball.
With Beckham, because his technique is so good, it seems to me that he can bend the ball round the fullback and still deliver a precision cross.
Cantona, he tees up Beckham. Crosses it towards Cantona!
It was the first of his kind. Everybody played 4-4-2 at the time. He redefined that position.
They have been ripped to shreds, really. Beckham's cross, and his stab!
Was I scared of David Beckham's pace? No. His crossing ability, yes, so you knew you had to get close to him because he didn't need to take you on. You would see a lot of the time in attacking areas that Gary Neville would be in front. So you're thinking, well, where is Beckham? Because he'd drop behind.
Off goes Gary Neville, and that's also exquisitely done.
Because he knew then he could control the football, so he could use his array of passing, and then he could drift into the central midfield where you couldn't mark him.
Dot wanted it played in early, but he's looked for Van Nistelrooy!
But then when he did drift wide, he'd probably drift wide and drop slightly back, so you were not in contact with him, and when the ball came to him, before you made contact with him, he was whipping those balls in.
Back it comes to Beckham.
You know, if you are putting yourselves in areas of the pitch where you are still becoming very, very effective, then why do you need to dribble with the ball?
David Beckham had an incredible ability from a dead ball situation.
It's Beckham. And it's in! He's done it now! David Beckham!
But this was honed on the training grounds of the Cliff and at Carrington. He would see Eric Cantona, he would see him stay behind and continue to train on his own with a football. And when he saw that, he would do that, and he would stay behind. And those free kicks weren't just 2 hours mucking around playing with everybody else doing a five-a-side or something. They came from hours and hours and hours of training.
It was interesting when you used to watch him in training, you know, how accurate he was time and time again. Probably 8 out of 10 free kicks would go, you know, virtually in the top corner. It was always good for the other keepers in the England squad especially, because they could get to know his little habits and whether he was going to go to the right or go to the left over the wall.
Taking the line of players back, including from Manchester United. Here goes Beckham! Brilliant!
Up until that point, free kick taking had been a sort of sketchy art. You know, some players did it, some players didn't, some players scored with free kicks now and again. But what Beckham did was he actually made free kicks like penalty kicks. If Manchester United or England got a penalty kick anywhere within the 30-yard radius of the goal, then you think it's as good as a penalty because Beckham's going to hit the net.
Suddenly, a boot manufacturer is looking at different ways to make the boot. The main wearer of those boots were David Beckham. And I just think when you've got a boot manufacturer bringing out a whole new brand, especially on the back of your free kick taking, that tells you absolutely everything you need to know.
His standing leg could really collapse, you know, it's certainly something I couldn't do, you know.
He'd bend his ankle down, go like this, which enabled him to get under the ball and put this incredible spin on it.
And his standing foot is more or less like a twisted ankle.
His body angle would be nearly at 45 degrees and maybe even less. That would enable him to wrap his foot around the ball a little bit more, and that's why he can create that sort of heavy dip on the ball.
You would not teach a kid, you know, to take a free kick or to take a shot like that.
It's another textbook Beckham free kick.
It was unique at the time, you know. I think everyone after that started copying the way he used to do it.
David Beckham was a star player in the Premier League and for England. His goals, his crosses and his success inspiring fans and even other players to try to bend it like Beckham.
He does it once again.
Though it was his marriage to a pop star that completed his transformation into international icon.
David Beckham married somebody who was 10 times as famous as him at the time they got married and propelled him beyond football. David Beckham was a superstar.
Beck's celebrity stardom really kicked off in Japan in '02. Now everybody in Japan, you know, loved David Beckham. Everybody in Japan, who saw anyone in an England shirt thought we were David Beckham. There was the massive party beforehand, which was supposed to be obviously a celebration of England going to career in Japan. And I think, you know, the England players had a little table in the corner, and we just sat there, you know, sort of star spotting. People like Mick Hucknall, Jamie Oliver doing this, and Elton John was there, and there's all these England footballers sat at a table in the corner, looking on, and you know, and we jumped on the bandwagon.
It must have been like going around with the Beatles in the 1960s. It was incredible. The team, which had hit superstardom from the treble, was mobbed, but Beckham was the focus every time. People would camp out for hours. They'd camp out overnight just to see them getting off the bus.
Famously, once I think we got off the bus in, I think it was Kobe. I think they closed down 4 blocks, you know, just for us to go to Hard Rock Cafe, whatever it was, for, you know, something different to eat. Beck's got off at the front, and it was just, you know, flashes of cameras everywhere. And I think, you know, all the security staff got off with him, you know, just to make sure. And I think Gareth Southgate shouted from the back, said, "Oh, don't worry, lads, we'll be all right back here." And there was 22 other players that we were second fiddle. But you know, don't get me wrong, we jumped on the back of that bandwagon because, you know, we were part of the David Beckham machine at that time, and you know, whatever he got, you know, it was obviously passed down to us.
I remember us being at the top of a hotel in Bangkok waiting for a press conference, and I'm talking about 50 stories up, and we heard the screams as Beckham got off the bus. People would pay to sit in the foyer of the hotel to put a garland on his head as he came in. Other players would sometimes just walk past and get in the lift, but he would always shake hands, do the right thing, get the garland, say hello, sign the shirt. I think that helped to raise the profile of the Premier League. It helped to raise the profile of English football, which was already big, but I think he made it bigger because everybody knew David Beckham. David Beckham was a superstar.
He obviously wanted to be a superstar, and obviously some of that must have been driven by his wife as well. I think he's created it. I think he's managed it.
He enjoyed going to these fashion shows, these shoots, being on magazines. He wasn't a reluctant superstar. He was a guy who really, really enjoyed being a superstar and played to it at every level, in his fashion, in his haircuts, in his goal celebrations.
With David Beckham! Magnificent goal by David Beckham! Against the run of play maybe, but a brilliant finish!
Job for David Beckham, though! Oh! That
I was out shopping in Manchester when the phone rang, and it was David Beckham's dad, who was a friend of mine. And he said to me, David's leaving Manchester United. And I said, what do you mean he's leaving Manchester United? And within about 2 hours, I was on air with a TV special because it was groundbreaking news. The bottom line is David Beckham didn't want to leave Manchester United, and it took him a long time to get over that.
The fame did affect his performance on the pitch in his final season at Manchester United, and that's why Sir Alex Ferguson let him go. One person was dominating the agenda when it should be the football team dominating the agenda. And for Alex Ferguson, as much as he liked David Beckham and still has a great relationship with him, there's one thing that matters for him, and that's the football team and the football club.
David Beckham scored 62 Premier League goals, but he created a whole lot more.
Sometimes we get a little bit sanitised in press boxes about how good the quality of crossing is. You really see, very close up, the ball's sort of swinging in, and the curve that David Beckham puts on these balls.
I always remember speaking to Dwight York after they beat Inter Milan in the quarter-finals of the Champions League, and both of his goals that night came from David Beckham crosses. People were asking him about his goal-scoring record and his goal-scoring run. He said, listen, I couldn't do it without this guy. He's got this unbelievable knack of, I run into the penalty area and I know he can put it on a sixpence and it's going to be there. And he said, and believe me, I've played with a lot of people in my career who couldn't put it there. It's the hardest thing to do, and he seems to do it in his sleep. When you look at Ruud van Nistelrooy's stats in his prime at Manchester United, there was a couple of seasons where maybe 50% of his goals
Looking into Ruud van Nistelrooy, didn't take long, did it?
Came from David Beckham, or David Beckham crosses.
Well, David Beckham, the supply line once more. And it was swept in.
Beckham could probably cross the ball 30 different ways. If you look at Beckham crossing the ball, you'll see his body. You see almost no two crosses look alike because his body twists and turns into different positions depending on where the defender is and the defender's body stance. And that allows him to deliver the same excellent cross every time. Rather than moving the defender, you move yourself. And that's why, you know, he delivers crosses from absurd angles.
He almost redefined the art of crossing the wall.
Beckham's lowest point arguably came in 1998, his strength of character enabling him to overcome vilification from those who blamed him for England's demise at the World Cup in France. Fans' ire provoked by this red card against Argentina, which precipitated England's exit from the tournament.
Well, his low point was getting sent off against Argentina in a game which I think most England fans went into in France '98 expecting to lose. But Beckham, responding to a little bit of provocation, kicked out, got himself sent off and became public enemy number one. The Daily Mirror had a back page of 10 heroes and one silly little boy, which would, of course, refer to Beckham.
Yes, at the time it's hard for an England fan to take, and someone who's in journalism might take it a little bit hard and give him give him some bad press. But I think over the piece, I think you have to look at the bigger picture and go, we can't lambast him.
Well, David Beckham got stick every ground he went to, bar Old Trafford. Even in his first game back after France '98, when everyone bar Manchester United fans were against him.
That season opener was against Leicester City. The away fans' reaction typical of the abuse which followed him all season.
Now Beckham, willed on by the Manchester United fans. Key.
I think the reality is, if you look like David Beckham and if you're good at what you do, you will get abuse.
He was a pin-up boy, he had the flick hair, everything about him seemed to say, make me a target if I fail.
If on top of that, you are, the biggest individual commercial brand in football and marry a pop star, you will get even more abuse.
Whenever he went to touch the ball, never mind couldn't take a free kick, everything rose to crescendo. And so when he was lining up that free kick, everyone in the ground was hoping it was going to, as in most people in the ground I should say, other than the Manchester United fans and other people who are in the press, were willing it to be, row Z, seat 64, just so they could slag him off.
It's the final minute of the game. Beckham would not be cowed.
Has to be a Beckham special. Can he dip it? Drops it in. Yes, he has! Beckham's back! Love him or hate him.
And instead, that indomitable confidence scores the goal. Watching his recovery from that lowest point, to take that level of abuse, still come through mentally, physically, ride the challenges, people spitting at you from the side, and play football to that level. I don't think anyone can even begin to imagine how, what an achievement that was for David Beckham. It's incredible. Probably one of the most remarkable and rewarding stories in recent football history.
Beckham left England with 6 Premier League titles and the respect of those within the game he graced.
Football players fall into, I guess, 3 categories. Those who are sublimely gifted and don't need to work hard at it. Those who have a talent and do have to combine that with work. And then there's those who basically are reasonably average football players but work until they make it to the best they possibly can be. Beckham, I think, comes in the middle category. He's not sublimely talented, he never was. And he would often be at Carrington
practising and practising and practising.
Practising his free kicks long after everyone else is gone.
I don't think he actually gets the credit for how good a player that he actually is.
Now David Beckham has got a famous goal against them. He's got a pretty good goal against them this time.
I mean, I can't think of many world-class footballers that don't get to the top by being lazy. Very, very rare. I think they all put the hours in.
You don't play for Manchester United for that amount of time if you're an average run-of-the-mill player.
And I think you get your rewards. I think all footballers that work hard, you always get your results.
David Beckham. Oh, what a brilliant goal!
And I remember we used to go to a Champions League away game and they'd train at the stadium the night before.
Now what can Beckham do? Oh, he liked it! He liked it a lot!
And they would literally be dragging him off from practising free kicks. He'd have balls after balls, he'd make the reserve goalkeeper stay there, and he'd practice and practice. He'd hit 50, 60 free kicks, and they'd be shouting, "Bex, the coach, back to the hotel," and he'd still be practising.
This is Beckham territory. Oh!
You would see Manchester United 4-0 up and a ball running out of play to go behind for a goal kick to the opposition, and he would chase it to keep it in, to try and get the ball in to get a 5th goal. People said he never had pace, and he didn't have the pace of like Cristiano Ronaldo, but if you line up all 22 players at the end of a football match and said we're having a race now to the other end of the pitch, after 90 minutes of football David Beckham would win it because his energy levels were supreme. This was a guy who got stuck in for the team. We remember all the free kicks, we remember the changes of hairstyles, we remember when he married a Spice Girl. This was a real proper footballer.
There's very few people who are willing to criticize Beckham as a person.
Beckham again, looks for the chip. Oh, what a goal!
That's something which I think often gets lost.
So rather than all the great goals, for me, when you think of David Beckham, I think of him as the person rather than just the player, because I think that's what made him such a great player, was his attributes as a human being. It made you think whether United could actually go from strength to strength or not.
He could dribble with the ball, but he doesn't need to dribble with the ball.
With Beckham, because his technique is so good, it seems to me that he can bend the ball round the fullback and still deliver a precision cross.
Cantona, he tees up Beckham. Crosses it towards Cantona!
It was the first of his kind. Everybody played 4-4-2 at the time. He redefined that position.
But they have been ripped to shreds, really. Beckham's cross, and his stab!
Was I scared of David Beckham's pace? No.
Gigs. This team, this group of young players, was all anyone around the club would talk about.
Beckham getting it through. Here's Cole. And now Sharp. Oh, it's a goal! Beckham has scored out of absolutely nothing, and Manchester United have regained their lead.
I mean, I first remember him when he played in, it was a tournament the under-21s always played in, Le Tournois, And I interviewed him by the swimming pool at the hotel they were staying in. Years later, I thought, you know, I interviewed this lad, and you just couldn't have seen what was to come.
You got a very distinct impression of
He had a special talent for doing special things.
Oh, it's a goal!
It's a useful cross. Sinclair. Only dropped to Beckham! Every goal he scores is an absolute beauty.
I don't think you could ever underestimate the ability of what David Beckham had.
David Beckham's work rate on a football pitch was fantastic.
Beckham again, looks for the chip. Oh, what a goal!
Fantastic cross off the ball.
One of the best crosses of all time. I mean, everyone's tried to copy him since.
But there was no bigger star. David Beckham was a star.
Trying to get a goal for United now, and get a goal he does. David Beckham broke into the Manchester United ranks alongside a crop of teammates who had won the FA Youth Cup in 1992. They were a special group who helped establish the club's 20-year dominance of the Premier League.
Neville, Butch Scholes, Beckham.
fairly shy, very quietly spoken, but very determined.
It wasn't like a young Ryan Giggs, where I think from a very young age that people knew something special was coming through the ranks here.
And in fairness, you have to point out that it wasn't just the six that made it. They had high hopes for a lot more. Your Ben Thornleys, your Keith Gillespies, your Chris Caspers, your John O'Kanes. Obviously, they realised that not all of them could make it, but it wasn't just the six, it was the whole team.
Which, of course, drew the famous Alan Hansen comment, you'll never win anything with kids, after a bit of an early season hammering, really, which suddenly